Good evening, Democrats. Hello, my name is Vincent Jones. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a training director and senior advisor with the California Democratic Party, and I'll be your host for this evening, or as my mother would like to say, I'll play the role of Oprah Winfrey for the evening, and guide us for this great prop talk. But before we begin, I want to invite you all to help us to spread the word because the point of these prop talks is to educate Democrats about our endorsed positions and propositions and let you know how to get involved. So I have an ask for you all. There is a link in the chat right now. Let's see if you can put the link in the chat. If you click on the link where it says condemn.org/prop30, and you can press share to share it on Facebook or press share to share it on Twitter to let all of your people on your socials know where they should be to learn more about this proposition. So if you can do that, that'll be fantastic. You can also just copy and paste the link and text it to some friends or email it to friends so they can join us for this conversation. Because we want to make sure that more and more Californians know why they should vote yes on Prop 30. Okay, so let's get into it. So as I said, this is our second in our Prop Talk series. We're talking about Prop 30. The California Democratic Party endorsed this initiative at our convention a few months ago. We want to give you an opportunity to hear directly from the campaign about the initiative, what it intends to do, dispel any myths, dispel any confusions, and let you know how you can get involved in helping make sure it passes. So first up, we're going to hear from two folks with the campaign. They're going to do a quick presentation. Then I'll ask them questions, and there'll be time for you to ask questions. There's a Q&A box. If you can start putting your questions there at any point, and we'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. But first, let me introduce Gretchen Newsom. Gretchen is the political director for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, or IBEW, Local 569. As political director, Gretchen organizes efforts to invest in local good-paying green collar jobs, workforce development, civic engagement, and renewable energy. Welcome, Gretchen.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight, and good evening, Democrats.
And with Gretchen, we also have Oscar Garcia. Oscar is EnviroVoter's ballot initiative coordinator. Oscar has lived his entire life in the San Fernando Valley. It's also where he went to school and discovered his passion for civic engagement and organizing in historically disenfranchised minority communities. Having spent the past 20 years in LA politics, starting from the ground floor as a lawn sign volunteer, who else has done that? I'm sure many of you have. He's had the privilege to serve as deputy district director for a member of Congress, chief of staff to a member of the state legislature, and the Southern California political director for SEIU 2015. Welcome, Oscar.
Hello, thank you, everybody. Hello, Democrats. Thank you for having us today.
All right, so we want to get started with a brief presentation from Gretchen and Oscar to give everyone a sense of the initiative, and then we'll go into just a Q&A. Let's get started with that.
Oscar, go ahead and take it away.
Wonderful. California Clean Cars Proposition 30 Clean Air Initiative. Here at California Environmental Voters, we see no way around meeting our climate goals. California breathes some of the most toxic air in the world, the hazards of which are disproportionately shouldered by women, children, seniors, and low-income communities. Hosting a third of the country's wildfires, a third record-breaking climate-fueled heat wave, and the meanest gas prices in the country, California is in desperate need of infrastructure capable of supporting clean transportation to combat the climate catastrophe coming our way. And we see no way other than Proposition 30 to lead that way into transitioning transportation to clean transportation the way we see it in an equitable and fair way. Gretchen, next slide, please. An intolerable toll on our most vulnerable communities. Communities of color suffer disproportionately from pollution. As we all know, they're mostly all in transit corridors, near ports. They're expanding into the central valleys, into the Inland Empire, with distribution centers are only getting worse. Pollution disparities are even more severe when taking into account socioeconomic status, as we all see firsthand accounts here in Los Angeles, Long Beach, San Jose, San Francisco, Oakland, and throughout. Vista would benefit most from transitioning to zero emission vehicles in these communities.
Before I go to the next slide, Oscar, I just wanted to throw out there that 8 of the 10 largest regions in the nation have the worst air pollution are located here in California. And that's according to the American Lung Association. So got to fix the air for our kids.
What Prop 30 does. Prop 30 provides an immediate, sustained generational investment to accelerate transition to clean vehicles and reduce catastrophic wildfires. This initiative is a result of long-time agenda of both labor and environmental organizations. That provides roughly $100 billion over the next 20 years in funding to provide towards zero-emission infrastructure towards charging in low-income communities, multifamily dwellings, rebates and subsidies and tax rebates to afford zero-emission vehicles, and also dedicated revenue to really combat catastrophic wildfires, which are now dampening our beautiful forests, which used to be carbon sinks, are now part of the problem with air particulates in certain areas in this state. It's a dedicated revenue source that's not at the mercy of the state budget, which we need to combat climate change.
Yep. So we have these wonderful aspirational goals to combat climate change, reduce those greenhouse gases. And this is the mechanism for how you're going to fund that and how you're going to implement that. So
Prop 30 addresses affordability prices. It makes EVs electric vehicles more affordable for middle-class and low-income families. Prop 30 provides nearly $45 billion in subsidies to help low-income, middle-income families purchase electric vehicles and zero-emission vehicles. The increased use of electric vehicles and zero-emission vehicles will help California meet our climate goals and drive additional demand and infrastructure, including upgrades to the distribution grid. Don't believe the misinformation out there. Having electric vehicles will not strain the grid. It's actually proven to actually help the grid, and this has been proven by members of the governor's actual climate folks and power sustaining folks that are his experts as well. It uses a progressive revenue source to fund these critical investments. Prop 30 funds these critical programs with a small 1.75% increase on personal income over $2 million a year to ensure the funding is provided by only the 35,000 wealthiest of California households, roughly 1% of the population of the state that can stand the burden, the cost to really affect climate change, which would also bring them back to the pre-Trump tax cuts, which has been proven that millionaire immigration will not happen. We're actually losing people from the state because of housing costs and lack of transportation help when it comes down to infrastructure as well. So we've actually increased the millionaires in the state throughout the years. Priorities for low-income communities and communities of concern. Prop 30 requires at least half the infrastructure funding go to low-income and disadvantaged communities, exactly where we need it the most to really combat climate change, ensuring that these jobs are created throughout the entire state. Good, clean, green, middle-class union jobs will be created out of this.
So
this is our
take a look here.
Yeah.
Unprecedented.
Our unprecedented coalition, as we all know, climate change is a big problem, and a big problem requires a big tent, right? And this is where we excelled, and this is where we differ from the opposition. We have over 150 progressive labor organizations, environmental groups, EJ groups, racial justice groups, you name it, we have it. Academics, everybody that's concerned about climate change and really wants to make it a priority is on the list here, and we are very proud of it.
I'm going to cover this one since I'm labor and unions. So why are unions supporting Prop 30, specifically IBEW, and also all of the building trades of the state of California are all united in support for this? Because this creates that just transition that so many of us have been focused on as we are transitioning to lowering the greenhouse gases. How do we do that and ensure that folks are still working and providing for their families with good quality jobs? So this is going to create those good green jobs all over the state of California. It provides nearly $35 billion in new charging infrastructure. That's a part of the requirement is that as those monies are going out through existing government agencies, CARB and the CEC, as that's going out and these new infrastructure stations are being created and installed and built, they have to be built by a skilled and trained workforce. And that workforce, by and large, has to have the electric training program or EVITP certification to do that. So these are high road jobs. The private sector trade unions, that's IBEW, is going to receive a substantial amount of those jobs, translating to 2,000 to 4,000 increase in full-time contractor jobs to get all these different EVs installed throughout the state. And then the new union administrative jobs at state agencies. Again, these funds that are going to be created by this small little tax on multimillionaires are going to be going to state agencies, and those state agencies are going to have to increase the number of jobs that are there to help divvy out these funds to those communities of concern. So that's going to be at least an additional 450 new union jobs for SEIU 1000 and the other bargaining units at the CEC and at CARB. So they're going to have that additional oversight that the public really cares about in creating new administrative jobs. You want to go back to this one, Oscar?
Definitely. It's transit oriented. Funding for zero emission buses and other zero emission public transit vehicles. CARB may spend up to $2 billion on medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles in the first 5 years of the tax. In the following years, there is no cap on CARB spending on buses and zero emission public transit vehicles. So like, let's say here in Los Angeles, there's an organization, a wonderful one, that Altamed in East LA, that does great work with their PACE program. In which they pick up seniors in the morning and they take them to senior daycare and health checkups. They'll be able to transition their shuttle fleet to electric fleets and actually apply for the subsidies and the tax rebates with CARB to afford these electric shuttle fleets, as well as small transit corridors as well, being able to transition those to electric bus fleets. CARB may spend an additional fund on e-bikes, bike share, and bike lanes to actually, greenify certain communities and really make it trans-oriented and changing the hearts and minds of people to really use those last mile corridor vehicles to really not be in vehicles anymore that pollute the air. CARB may spend a position of the allocated money on transit passes for low-income communities and disadvantaged communities. So subsidizing free transit or low-cost transit in low-income communities will be prioritized as well. It's just a domino effect of all the ramifications of Prop 30 will create in across low-income communities, exactly where we need it the most.
Really quickly, I forgot how much I hate acronyms, but CARB is the California Air Resources Board, and CEC is the California Energy Commission, so two statewide agencies. Another function of Prop 30 that it might be able to do, or is likely to do, is also help aid school districts in transitioning their buses to zero emission buses, so cleaning the air for our children that are in schools. And that's the quick presentation. So the website is yeson30.org. You can go there to sign up to support and get active on the campaign. But I am going to stop sharing my screen unless there's something. Vincent, is there anything in the chat where I have to go back to a particular slide?
No, I don't think so. We can just get into Q&A so we can get. So the first question, and I know you talked about it in the presentation, but just want to make sure we put an underline, a highlight, an exclamation point on it. So $100 billion is a lot of money. Can you say again where the money would go and who would manage it?
Sure. So the monies are going to be derived from a small additional personal income tax on those individuals making more than $2 million a year. So if you make $1.9 million a year, good on you. Those aren't my numbers, but congratulations, you're not paying anything more. But it's really time for those multimillionaires to pay their fair share to clean the air for everyone. And then these monies that are derived from the small tax on the multimillionaires is going to be going to CARB, California Air Resources Board, and CEC, California Energy Commission, that are then going to bulk up their programs, their existing programs, to provide these subsidies, $45 billion in subsidies to families to afford EVs, and then also $35 billion for the EV infrastructure to be built out across the state of California. contained within the ballot language itself, which was crafted by environmental groups and in partnership with labor, there are no carve outs for any specific corporation or entity. The only carve out and priority that's contained within this ballot is that half the funds have to go to disadvantaged communities, communities that have not been taken care of in years past. So this is our mechanism to try to right the course. When our friends at Climate Action Campaign, they've done some research where they've looked at different maps of the state of California and where there is the most use of EVs, the most charging infrastructure, they have the cleanest air. That's all occurring in the wealthiest communities. Then when you take a look at the maps of where the highest air pollution is, the highest amount of asthma rates in children and seniors, has the lowest amount of EVs, the lowest amount of EV infrastructure, and are just polluted all around. So this is the mechanism to provide that equity to the state of California, so that as we are progressing forward and transitioning to zero emission vehicles and combating climate change, it's going to be done with the equity lens.
Thank you.
And also
You
20 billion. Also 20 billion goes to combat catastrophic wildfires as well and to reduce the cost. Last year alone, we spent $250 million alone in overtime pay for Cal Fire.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. You addressed the question that I wanted to ask about to clarify if any of the money is going to private corporations. And you said very clearly no. And I'm glad you raised the equity issue. That's another question I want to ask. So you talked about how 50% of the money will go to low-income families. There was a question in the chat about how low-income is defined. Can you speak to that?
That's gonna, to my understanding, Oscar, correct me if I'm wrong, but be defined by those government agencies. As they receive these funds, they're gonna have to go through a process where they're creating those programs or changing those programs to make it more equitable. And then they're gonna define that. So is that, I think that's correct.
Yeah, and they'll use the green guidelines as well, in which certain areas that obviously certain calculations don't make sense when it comes down to calculating what is low income in certain geographic areas across the state. So those calculations will be put into effect using the HUD's low income calculus and all that as well.
Great. And then on a follow-up to that, is it your sense that it can be, that's a cap? Can more than half of the money go to low-income communities, or is it only that amount that can go to those communities?
It's a baseline. So if they're going to exceed that baseline and deliver even more funds to low-income communities, great.
Great. And so, what happens if initiative doesn't pass? Climate change is a big issue. Our air is still not as clean as it should be. What is the impact of this bill, of this initiative not passing?
Oscar, do you want to take that one? Because goals.
I don't see us meeting our climate goals. I see us reaching our 2035 deadlines, and us having a year-round wildfire season, hotter summers, a strain on the electrical grid, low-income people even doing worse in communities of color because of not being able to transition to EV vehicles, which is a domino effect. As we all know, once you transition to an EV vehicle, you save over $10,000 in the lifetime maintenance of the vehicle. You also save as well when it comes down to the gas pump, with gas prices going astronomical. This is a catastrophe we're trying to avoid and really get ahead of. And the only way we see it happening is through dedicated funds. So if knock on wood, this doesn't happen, then we'll be back at the drawing board trying to find other dedicated revenue sources, trying to really combat climate change, because this is something we can't give up on. And this is something that we're going to have to fight day in, day out for.
Gretchen, people are asking many times in the chat, why does Governor Newsom oppose this initiative? Do you care to share? And I'm sure people are also wondering, those who don't know you, if there's any relation.
So let's do a little disclaimer real quick. I'm not related to Governor Gavin Newsom. I'm just the other G Newsom of the state of California. So I am not like whatever the Twitter trolls say. I'm not his wife, his aunt. He's not my uncle. not related to him, period. But as to why Governor Newsom has opposed this, it's pretty perplexing to us, where we had this huge monumental surplus this year, and good on the governor for allocating a small portion of that to electric vehicle infrastructure, but it is not enough. And this is the proposition, the only environmental initiative on the ballot this season that is going to create that change and create the funds that are necessary in order to implement his goals to combat climate change and to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. So the need is far greater than what is currently offered by the state legislature. They haven't done the job that we need them to do. So we're going to do it for them and get this passed.
Fantastic. Another question that is coming up a lot is, and you mentioned it a little bit in the presentation, but can you maybe talk about it a different way? How do more electric vehicles help the grid?
Okay. So my members at IBEW, the union electricians, they are construction workers. They're super excited about the new Ford F-150 Lightning. That's an all EV truck. Not just because it's all EV and they're going to install the electric vehicle infrastructure, but because it contains a battery that allows them to power their houses if anything goes awry and there's any blackouts. So the new technology that's coming on board with the newer EVs creates a mechanism so that if the grid has strain, the EVs, the electric vehicles, can push power back to the grid. And it was just recently said in the news when we had the recent Flex alert that the EVs that were out there were assisting the grid and becoming more reliable by delivering that power back. Oscar, anything else you wanted to say for that one?
Yeah, definitely. And most EVs are charged during early morning and night when the electric demand is at the lowest. And also the new batteries coming online will actually, when fully charged, will actually feed back into the grid as well, into the system. So, and this is technology that needs to be proliferated. The more we use it, the more refined it becomes, and the better it becomes for everybody, and the cheaper it becomes as well.
A few more questions. Number one, I learned something new today. I had no idea that electric vehicles send power back to the grid. So I know you mentioned that no corporations are going to get a carve out for the initiative for the funds, but can you talk about any corporations that are supporting the proposition?
Sure. So I want to first talk about the origin of this ballot initiative, because there is some confusion out there. And I'm just going to say the elephant in the room. There are people out there that are lying, saying that this is the LIFT initiative. That couldn't be farther from the truth. Over 2 years ago, environmental groups Move LA and Spur held a series of Zoom-posiums where they were trying to come up with the best ideas for how we're going to combat climate change and really move the needle for how consumers act in things. And so they came up with this idea that we need to transition individual cars and also larger cars and trucks and buses to become ZEVs, zero emission vehicles. And then they partnered later on, after they drafted their first concept, with labor to help collaborate on that. And then they created this initiative. And then LIFT was addressed of like, LIFT, you seemingly share these values that we have in the labor movement and the environmental movement to have cleaner air for all, to combat climate change, and to start to transition people to zero emission vehicles. Will you help fund this initiative? And they said yes. But when you look at the initiative itself, there is no carve out for LIFT. There is no guarantee that they're going to receive $1 of it. So they share our values. And it is a little disappointing that I see them being beaten up. I have beaten up on them before for some other labor matters. However, they're taking this good action and acting as a good corporation for once, which I wish more corporations in California would share these values and come on board with combating climate change, cleaner air for all, reducing wildfires, and really helping transition California to the new green economy.
Great. Three questions for you. And then we're going to end because we want to end on time. One, how can people get involved in spreading the word about Yes on 30?
They can come to the website and they can sign up to support it. They can make a contribution. They can simply talk to your neighbors and your family about supporting Prop 30. I mean, this is the most progressive and monumental initiative that we have on the election right now for November, but it's going to have such a huge impact. The more that you can share why you're going to vote yes on Prop 30 with as many people as possible, please do so. Since you're all Democrats, you probably just received from the Democratic Party why you need to vote yes on Prop 30. This is reversed. Sorry, it does say Prop 30. But share this with your friends and family, because you've got friends next door to you that may not be registered as Democrats and may not be receiving this lovely pamphlet in the mail that so eloquently displays why you need to vote yes on Prop 30. So get out there, get active, talk to the moms at the schools, talk to the dads and the preschools, et cetera, and let's get this thing passed. Get active, get out there, walk your precincts.
Definitely, and please follow us on socials, and please repost on socials as well, and please dispel the misinformation out there.
Can you tell our audience what do firefighters get out of this, and how does this help us with fire prevention?
Yeah, hold on. Oscar, my screen just froze. 1 second.
Uh-oh.
Yes.
We see you. Yeah.
Okay. So this, of the $100 billion over the 20 years, 20 billion of it is going to be going to CAL FIRE. That's going to assist with staffing. I'm sure many of you are aware that the staffing levels of CAL FIRE are significantly underemployed and overstressed. Their firefighters are working these crazy hours where they work like 28 days in a row, and then they get 2 days off, and then they go back to working 28 days. And then you see the stress of the wildfires itself. So it's going to not only provide some additional funding for staffing, very critically needed by our firefighters, but it's also going to work on some infrastructure issues by hardening the landscape, preventing those wildfires. It is not like $20 billion to go and cut down all the trees, but there's definitely funds in there to remove the dry, God, I wish I was a firefighter sometimes. The dry brush fire stuff that's going to be triggering wildfires. So there's mechanisms in there to help fund that. And I wish I had the list right in front of me as a firefighter, but I'm not. It's good stuff. That's why CAL FIRE is so supportive of this.
Well, we can also include that information when we follow up with everyone who RSVP'd after this event.
Yes.
So I know that we're at time, but in the chat, you will have the link to the website where you can go and get more information and more questions answered. Gretchen or Oscar, who should people reach out to if they want? Go ahead.
Sorry. Back to wildfires. Home hardening. So individual homes are going to benefit from this. Tree trimming, brush management, and fuel breaks. Those are the magic words I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. If people want to email to get more involved or to ask more questions, is there an email you can provide for that?
You could email me at oscar@envirovoters.org.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Gretchen. Thank you, Oscar, for the work y'all are doing for our environment, for our communities, and the California Democratic Party support you in voting yes on 30. Want to encourage everyone who's watching to do the same, to tell a friend, tell your grandmother, tell your sister, tell everybody in your family to make sure they vote and vote yes on 30. You can tune in next week, next Wednesday, same bat time, same bat channel, for our next prop talk. We're talking about why we're voting no on 27. So thank you all for this evening. Have a wonderful rest of your night. Until next week.